Welcome, friends. Are you ready for a story? This is a story of Quaker faith and witness. It's a story about someone who listened to the still small voice within and understood what God wanted her to do, so that her beliefs on the inside and her actions on the outside became one and the same. Her actions bore witness to truth. Mary Fisher lived in England long ago, the same time as George Fox and other early friends. She worked as a servant for a wealthy family. She was poor and could not read or write. One day, Mary heard some Quakers who were preaching a message about God's love, power, and light that was for all people. Through the words and actions of the Quakers, she discovered the power of God within herself. She became a friend. And then Mary Fisher, too, spoke out about the power of God in each person that could change the world. But there were people who were afraid of the Quakers' message. And Mary Fisher was put in prison. Mary was not the only Quaker there. She and others worshiped, prayed, and sang together. They took care of each other in that place. Mary learned how to read and write, and while the prison was very difficult, friends lived in God's love, power, and light, and so they knew God's peace. Finally, Mary got out of jail. Mary Fisher listened. She listened for what God wanted her to do, and she felt God ask her to go to the colonies in America to tell people there about God's love, power, and peace. She crossed the Atlantic Ocean. And when the ship finally arrived in Boston, a place where there was not one other Quaker, when Mary got off the ship, she was sent straight to jail. The governor there was afraid of her message of God's love, power, and peace. He burned all her books. He was so afraid of Mary Fisher and her message that he boarded up the jail window so no one could see or hear her. After about a month, the governor put her on another ship and sent her away. Back in England, Mary Fisher listened, and she felt God ask her to go again on a journey, this time to a place that we know today as the country of Turkey. She was being called to go there and speak to their leader, who was called a sultan. In those days, the people in England believed that the people in the Sultan's kingdom wanted only violence and war. They did not know them, but they were afraid of them. Mary felt that God was calling her to tell the Sultan this message of God's love, power, and peace. It was a long and difficult journey. But God was with her to help Mary. When she finally reached the Sultan's kingdom, she had to search to find him. She asked many people for help, but no one would guide her. They were afraid of the power of the Sultan. They thought they would be punished if the Sultan did not want to see Mary Fisher or did not like the message she said she was bringing from God. We don't know how, but somehow Mary discovered where the Sultan was. He was encamped with 20,000 soldiers. The young Sultan, whose name was Mehmet IV, he was 17 years old. He was in a silk tent embroidered in gold thread. Everyone, the Sultan and his attendants, were there in their finest clothes because they had heard Mary had a message from God, who they called Allah. Mary stood before the Sultan in her plain dress and bonnet. She stood in silence. The Sultan kindly invited her to speak, but Mary remained still and quiet. Mary was waiting. She knew God would give her the words to speak out of the silence. The Sultan waited too. The light of God shines in each person. In this light is love. In this light is truth. In this light is power. In this light is peace. The Sultan listened, and he said, "You have spoken the truth." Mary had done what God asked her to do. She returned to England. We remember Mary Fisher as a friend who had the courage to listen for God and be faithful, sharing the good news of God's love, power, and peace. I wonder what part of the story you liked best. I wonder what part of the story felt most important to you today. I wonder where you are in the story, or what part feels like it's about you. I wonder if there is any part of the story that we could take out and still have all the story that we need. I wonder if you have ever been still and listened for God to help you to know what to say, how to love, what to do, who to be.